John J. Oliver is an internationally renowned psychic, medium, and spiritual teacher. At the age of 5, John began seeing the spirits of people who had crossed over. In his teenage years, John turned to deep meditation and martial arts to help hone these profound abilities. Since then, John has given over 13,000 intuitive readings, taught university courses in psychic development, and is sought after by law enforcement to assist in unsolved cases. Above all, John is deeply committed to the evolution of human consciousness. In this humorous, practical, and sometimes surprising discussion, John shares his insights from his spiritual journey to assist you on yours. And now, John J. Oliver on spiritual practice.
Most people in the world, it seems, are asleep. And, I just came back from a wonderful conference where outside the conference doors were all of these robots, statues of robots at least. And they were a commemorative to us, to people, that was supposed to remind us that we are robotic, or we can let ourselves be robotic if we don't do something to wake ourselves up from that habit. Sometimes when life is flowing along in a particular direction, and you get that feeling like, something is not right. Something might be awry. But from the outside, everyone looking at it, everyone thinks, oh, it's going, very well. You're, successful, and you're happy, and you have friends, and you have good work. But something inside of you feels like, well, something is not quite right. When that happens to me, I take a deep breath and I say to myself, John, what are you up to? And what I mean by that is, we have an ego structure. And that ego structure can only see the world in one or two ways, maybe. Not very many options. Because the thing about the ego, it's the robot. It does not have that many options. The soul has every option. The soul is free, it's spontaneous, it responds to the moment, it is the moment. But the ego can only do one or two things, and that feeling that something is wrong, it can be several things. Number one, it could be that nothing is wrong, that everything is perfectly all right. You're being loved, for example, and you are getting good feedback about your work. Everything is good. But that feeling that the ego has that things are not going well could simply be because the underlying program of the robot would like to sabotage you. Would like to sabotage you and make you question the flow. And then by doing that, you're no longer in the moment. And I've seen people worry themselves terribly. I'm a psychic professional. And because of that, a lot of people come to me to ask every kind of question. I think the number one question that people ask me, a very common one would be, I just met someone. And it seems to be going really, really, really well. What do you see? And I said, well, I see somebody who's telling me it's going really, really, really well. And relationships are very interesting because when things are going really well, the ego in the background is just waiting for the other shoe to drop, right? For what's going to go wrong. Wrong is an interesting concept in this regard because some people, all of us, you know, can't get our ego around the fact that every single relationship that we have and all of the stages that it goes through, it's there to teach us something ultimately about ourselves. I remember in one of the channelings that was talking about soulmates, you know, years ago. One of the questions that was posed was, what about if the soulmate is about something big? That it's not about just who you get to hold hands with on the beach. What if the soulmate's about something big? Not just, you know, who you get to eat dinner with for the next 50 or 60 years, or wake up with. What about if the soulmate is about something big, like your own self-realization, your own transcendence of your ego? And what about if the soulmate is that aspect in the other, or the others, that is divine, that you're seeking in yourself? A lot of people know that I'm a channel, and one of the things that Jerome said in the channeling was that every soul is seeking God, and there comes a point where you've projected some of your God into the other, and you see that into the other. That's the phase when you're so in love, right? But that is wonderful because that's reflecting what's ultimately, you know, inside of you that you're looking for, that is beyond that robotic ego structure. Okay, so sometimes the ego says something is wrong because everything is right, and it wants to throw you off out of the moment just to enjoy what's here right now, expecting that other shoe to drop. But sometimes the ego says, or that feeling inside that says something is not right, because sometimes something's not right. And we want to deny that. Meaning, for example, that you start going down that old path again. You start going down that old pattern again. Or you met that same person again. Or you are doing the same thing again in a friendship or a relationship. That's the ego. That's the robot. You can't stop yourself. You want to do something different. The robot takes you over, and then you're mad because the other person is supposed to be able to read your mind. The boss is supposed to know you want to be appreciated more. Your friends are supposed to automatically know that you have children now and you can't hang out with them like you used to, or whatever it is. Because when people are supposed to automatically know for you, because they're now mind readers, you know, that is the ego not wanting to take responsibility, to speak up and say, I have something to say. You have to listen to me. But you know what? It takes this oomph is a good word, this oomph of courage to be able to do that, because you don't want to disrupt the harmony. You know, I tell people, when you don't want to disrupt the harmony and you are in turmoil on the inside, you're not in harmony. You're not in harmony. There's nothing harmonious about suffering silently so that everybody else can have the appearance of equilibrium. You know, when equilibrium is not there. That's what the robot wants. That robotic ego sense of ourselves. So, you know, in the world today, I think more and more people are getting tired of the robot self. I think people are seeking in greater numbers than they ever have. You know, there was a friend of mine, a good friend of mine, who was having a very, very hard time. And he says to me, I think I'm just suffering, you know, too much. Life is no fun. And my answer to him was, don't take this the wrong way, but I think what your real problem is, you haven't suffered enough. So what does that mean? It means that when you do suffer enough, if that's the path you choose, I don't believe people have to suffer to learn, but that's a path a lot of people do take. When you do suffer enough, the pendulum will tend to come back toward the center. People who are afraid in, let's say, a Halloween haunted house and just are terrified, it's going to keep them up for weeks. I tell them, oh my gosh, not much has happened to you in your life. You know, this is not a real thing, you know, to be concerned about. This is not a real thing to be afraid of. That's what happens with a lot of suffering. It has to do with, you know, perspective. You know, the Buddha said that there's suffering in life. But then he goes on to say there's a way out of that suffering, which is what I'm interested in, you know, for the whole world, you know, the way out of that suffering. And sometimes the way out of that suffering is moving through it, experiencing it fully, and seeing that much of the suffering is an interpretation, or it's a projection onto life, giving it some suffering significance that it doesn't have. On a daily basis, I think the drug of choice for people staying asleep, as difficult as things like prescription drugs are for some people, or alcohol is for some people, or other kinds of hard drugs are for people. Television, that's hard for some people. That's a drug some people use by overly, you know, watching TV. Some people watch TV more per day than they spend at the office. And they're the same ones that complain to themselves that things aren't moving forward the way they want to. But that's not the drug of choice. None of those are the drug of choice of our society. We have the luxury in the West that our drug of choice can be to worry. Because we have running water. You know, unlike the little boys and the little girls in Kenya who are walking distances to bring a pail of water home to the house. You know, I guess if they had running water, that would free up some time so they could worry. Or the grandmother on a mountain in Bolivia who spends the day figuring out how she's going to feed her grandchildren that night. Well, I guess if Whole Foods were next door, she'd have a lot of time freed up for worrying. So that is, in the one sense, the great and wonderful thing about the West is that outwardly, my gosh, we have so much material abundance that even people in our society who don't have extra cash, we can still go to the library for free. People who don't have extra beautiful accommodations can still spend the day at the shopping mall, inside, in air conditioning. In other words, there's a lot of luxurious opportunity. And a lot of people who hear me say that are confused. Say, well, I'm not living any sort of luxurious, life. Well, that's because you're born in the West. Let's transport you to some place to see how most of the world lives. And then you'll realize, I am luxurious. But the other side of this luxury is that it gives you all this free time. So we have time to worry. Worry is the drug of choice for staying asleep. Because the robot wants to go round and round and round and round worrying because it doesn't have to have the courage and the responsibility to get out of the loop. It does not allow you to enjoy the relationship you're in because you're worried something's going to go wrong. So I got news for everybody. Wrong is how you evaluate it. And every single relationship that you have right now on earth will one day transform. Somehow. One way or the other. Hopefully, the two of you will ascend together. But usually, people eventually part ways, or one of or the other leaves the physical body. So, by fearing life, by fearing life cycles and the naturalness and the cycles of life, you don't prevent it. But what you do prevent is the full experience of that love and that life in that moment, right then. Not enjoying the moment is a form of sleep. Because when you are present, when you're in the waking state, life is amazing. My father one time told me, I remember the first time I can consciously remember somebody telling me, I'm bored. And that shocked me to hear my father say he was bored. because he's your father, you know, and he's supposed to have these great powers over boredom, and, you know, he's the protector, and he's provides for the house, and he's bored. You know, it was one evening, I don't guess much was going on. He was bored. And at the time, I was almost 15 years old. And that struck me to hear him say he's bored. And he said, because I don't really have anything to do right now. And this, I got very present, as I recall. It woke me up. Shock can wake you up. And to have a father who is hardworking and engaged with life suddenly say this one particular evening, I'm bored, shocked me. So much that what came out of my mouth was, I looked at him, and because he said, I don't have anything to do right now. And I said, no one has anything to do. And there was a silent moment. I said, no one has anything to do. Everyone who's doing anything is making it up. Right? And he didn't know what to say. And he said, yeah, I guess I'll go stare at the ceiling. And I said, well, if you do that well, then you won't be bored. And ever since then, I've actually said to people, I do not experience boredom. I cannot consciously remember a moment, anytime recently, in years, in childhood even, I just can't recall a memory, I'm bored, or me saying, I'm bored. It's different to look at a movie or a play and say it's boring. It has a little different connotation, but to be bored means you are not present. Because it is true. If you stare at a ceiling properly, it's extremely interesting. It's very interesting. There's always even the moment of self-reflection, to reflect on yourself, to sit for a moment and just be quiet and be with your thoughts. But see, here's where we get into the sleep again. People watch too much TV or drink too much or do drugs too much because the moment can be very painful. Everyone has this attempt to avoid the potential and the possibility that one will suffer, that one just suffers kind of mediocrely all the time. I think I'd rather suffer all at once, intensely, move through it. Remember, the Buddha said, in life there's suffering, but there's a way out of that suffering. And the way out of that suffering, I think, is the waking state. If you're awake, then you can do anything. If you're awake, then you're not owned by any fears. You know, that's one of the reasons why I'm so attracted to true martial arts philosophy. In martial art, we have particular principles or tenets that ideally we aspire to live by. And if you ever find yourself in a moment not living by one of the tenets or virtues, then the moment you recognize that, it's your responsibility to fix it as fast as possible. And it doesn't matter if you are a new student walking in the door, you know, In a lot of martial arts schools, they're called the white belts. So if you're a white belt walking in the door, or if you've been there for 20 years, and you're a black belt, the same thing applies. The moment you find yourself making an error, you move yourself to fix it as fast as possible. The metaphor for that is the punching and kicking in martial art. You find yourself, making a mistake in a technique. The moment you recognize that, don't fix it tomorrow. Don't keep doing the technique incorrectly. It reinforces the habit. As soon as you see it, fix it quickly. I've seen a lot of martial artists in my life. I've seen some great martial artists that were great at punching, kicking, smashing bricks, breaking stones, who unfortunately, somewhere along the way, forgot the beginner's mind. That's one of the principles of martial art, to approach your training with the beginner's mind, because then things are open. There's possibility for something new to come in rather than just right away. No, we can't do things that way. It's not traditional. So what's the tradition? Is the tradition to be in the state of beginner's mind? Is that the tradition? Or is the tradition just to keep doing the same thing the same way over and over and over again? That's the robot. And so that's a metaphor for everything else. There's in life that when you're awake, you have insight. And insight means, very simply, I've learned that insight means that you take this over here and this over here, and they don't seem to go together, and you find a way to create something, new out of it. It's one of the things I loved about my grandmaster when he says, martial art has to grow into the modern times. We're not training in martial art in America, in the West, because we think that any moment ninjas are going to come out of the mountain and attack us, so we've got to be prepared to fight the ninjas. We do it to train the body, mind, and spirit. Is that a form of meditation? Maybe. I think it's a form of meditation for some people. For some people, it's just something interesting to do. A few years ago in my studio, there was a black belt who said to me, and again, it's one of those moments that I was stunned. This black belt said to me, I think it's wonderful that for you and some of the other black belts, that martial art, means something more to you than just exercise. Because to most of us, it's just exercise. And I was stunned as I'm looking at her black belt. And I'm wondering, is this traditional? Is this the tradition of what the masters, created, martial art for? It's just for exercise? So, in life, you can approach anything that it's just, I go to work just to make money. Just to make money? You're not doing great work then, if that's the only thing you're doing. those who approach it in that deeper sense that it can be a lifestyle, well, that transfers over in the same way as any meditative lifestyle. Contemplative lifestyle. Contemplative means that you understand that the most important thing you can do for yourself is to know yourself. If you do not know yourself, nobody else can know you. That's the first thing I ask many people who come to me for a psychic reading. I've met someone new. What do you know about him? What do you know about her? And I'll say, well, do you know yourself? What? What does that have to do with anything? Do you know yourself? Because if you do not know yourself, no one's going to know you. If no one can know you, you can't have a relationship. You can't have a communion, an exchange. You can't create something new out of that. You know, there's some wisdom that says when couples get together, go forth and multiply and make the world fruitful. That has a historical reference to, needing to survive the tribe and increase the tribe. But there could be a metaphorical meaning in that too. That when two people or more come together, if you're doing anything that's important by being in company together, you create something new. Something great comes out of it. A relationship doesn't need to stop at self-indulgence. Oh my God, everything's so wonderful. Look, I finally have a relationship. That's good. Okay. But what about what it can create for the world? How can you use that as part of your own spiritual homework? I have seen over 13,000 readings. And I'm not talking about channelings. I'm not talking about work with police cases. I'm talking about sitting across from someone, using my intuition, or using the symbolic language of astrology to have a conversation about what's going on with someone. When I'm doing that, and the concern is so much for, will I be successful? Will anyone ever love me? What's wrong with me? Nothing ever works out, right? Well, do you know where you are right now? You're in a psychic reading. Does that compute that this is a luxury? Does that compute that you drove across town in a car, probably? Paid for the appointment? Something's working out. And that brings us to this spiritual practice that's very prevalent right now that I really think needs to be more prevalent. There's a lot of conversation about it, but it's the spiritual practice of acknowledging where you are. Another way of saying that is to be thankful for where you are. To acknowledge where you are is to have the beginner's mind. This is where you are. This is the starting point. Rather than diffusing all that energy and attention to worrying about all the possibilities of what may go wrong. This is where you are. Now, that you know where you are, now can you raise the vibration? Can you make that a little higher? And try somehow to be grateful for where you are. All right. Maybe I'm having a bad day. I can be grateful for the sky. I can be grateful for the sky. Yes. When you're grateful for the sky, it changes what's inside of you. It's like if I give, the car a little push, it might start going when it's out of gas. Like when a person's out of gas, they need a little push. And suddenly, oh, okay, well, I can be grateful for the earth now and the grass. Oh my gosh. Now I can be grateful for the air. Now, to some people may seem ridiculous or silly, but while I'm over there being grateful for the sky and the earth and the air, and somebody is over there not grateful for anything and just worried, who's at the open door? It takes you to the open door. Doors of possibility, because it energizes you. I think all of us, somewhere in the world, have grown up with the command to count your blessings. But that's said so much that people don't look into it. It's like, okay, and what else can I do? What else can I do to make things better? But besides that, I've already counted my blessings. What else can I do? Count them again. Count them again. Get them out and count them a third time if you need to. It puts you in an incredible state of possibility, of expectation. I have observed in myself and in people that you tend rarely to get or to receive from life just what you casually want. But I have found more often that whether it's on the conscious level or just underneath the surface somewhere unconsciously, you always get what you expect because that's what you think you deserve. Wow. That is, even thinking about that is kind of heavy because, it just ups the level of responsibility for oneself. If this is what I'm manifesting, if this is what's in front of me, as difficult as it is this what I believe I deserve? Well, let's first of all reframe it. Maybe it's not so dire as you think it is. Maybe there's that worrying projection over it. Maybe it is what you think you deserve because you've been taken over by a vice or a chief feature that says, you know what, people, if they only found you out, they only knew how you really don't like yourself or how you really think so low of yourself. Well, I'm going to tell you something. People know. Even if they don't know, they know. And in that sense, they know in the energy knows. There is a hunger for spirituality that I'm observing in a lot of people, and it's amazing. And there's this wave of energy that seems to be going around the world, and people are more than ever able to ask, what am I doing here? what is my purpose in life? And who am I supposed to be with in this journey? And those are very good questions, because I've learned that the universe is always listening. And the questions that you ask sincerely, you've heard the wisdom, ask and you shall receive. Oh, you do receive. If you ask sincerely, who am I? And you think, wow, this is a great spiritual exercise. This is going to make me feel better. This is going to improve my life. And you ask that kind of question sincerely, things might fall apart before they get put back together, depending on what you've structured your life around. If your life is centered around who you're not, and who you know you're not supposed to be with, and work you're not enjoying doing, or you can't bring joy to that work, but you're praying, who am I? And you're sincere about that, the whole force of the universe gets behind you to show you what that is, so that you're now immersed in life, so you have to swim in some new waters. When you ask, what is my purpose? Not worry about what your purpose is, or you'll get around to finding it out someday. That always is really just always amazed me. You'd think you'd want to find that out early. You know, I mean, who is it that gets on a cross-country trip across the United States and just gets going, not knowing the road before them, and say, well, you know, I think in a few days I'll put the GPS on then. Yeah. If you are purposeless and don't know where you're going, and but are trying to get to a specific location, it's the same thing. To ask that question early. What do I do about that? Well, I find it's very easy. I have found that it became easy. I wake up every morning in a very supple consciousness. Supple means you're kind of groggy. I wake up a little groggy, and I'm glad I do, because groggy is so much fun. In that groggy state, when consciousness is supple, after I have taken a deep breath and have been grateful for the air, and just grateful as an attitude before I stand up, after that, I vibrate to the universe and I ask that whatever my purpose is that day, that I be led to it expeditiously. What is my purpose today? May I be led to it expeditiously. May it flow as I move toward it. I'll let it go. After that, I just get on with the day, because if you ask and you get into the habit of asking, what you're doing is you're interacting with the energy. When you don't ask, when you don't talk to the energy, to the universe, you are behaving as if you are all by yourself in creation, and you are not connected to anything. When you go for a drive, you're connected to the whole of all the other drivers that are following the signs and looking at the traffic lights, and you're being directed. When you're walking through life, it's in the universe, it's the same way. There's a constant interaction with it. It is always creating and manifesting and showing you something. You just have to follow it. It patiently awaits for us to, in whatever life that is, to find our awakening, to find our purpose, to fulfill the soul contract of what we're want to do or supposed to do on earth. So that's where the spiritual hunger is coming from. Enough people are starting to get, I am much more than all this. Whatever I am is containing this. But I'm much more than all of this. Which brings the question, what happens after this? That's an adventure, I think. You know, we've all heard the expression, as above, so below. So if life can be an adventure, then what happens after we leave the physical body? That's just continuing the adventure. There was this shaman who was asked, what happens when you die? And you know, I was ready for a very lofty answer. You know, elaborations on the tunnel and the light and, you know, the great adventure of the beyond and ascension and Merkabas and everything else like that. And he said, nothing. Nothing happens. What? But then I got it. He was at such a state of consciousness, awareness, that death is a no thing to him. In our mystery school, there's a teaching that says that it is the hope for everyone that death for you becomes incidental. My goodness. When you hear that, how amazing could that be? If you've woken up in your relationship to the universe, to God, that you keep walking on your walk and you're over there now. Oh, I left the body. I must have left the body. That it's that incidental to us. That's a mastery, you know, of life. I think we're here to understand that. And when we understand that, then there's no fear. You worry, you're not going to stop life. No matter how much you worry, you're not going to stop the natural cycle of dying. But by worrying, you're going to miss the scenes along the way. You're going to miss the scenery. And there's something to be said about enjoying the scenery, I think. That's why we're, you know, created with a sense of touch and a sense of smell and taste. We are enjoying the scenery. That's a very interesting word, to enjoy something. You know, joy is very wakeful because it's right in the middle. It's right in the middle. But if it gets to be too much, to the point where it becomes an obsession or an addiction, then the very thing that was the problem or was the solution becomes the problem. For example, we use mantras sometimes to focus our mind. I'd say your mind is just crazy, and it helps you to to say a mantra like peace or Om, and you do that 100,000 times. And so now your brain isn't scattered all over the universe everywhere. But if you do it 100,000 times and it too becomes a habit, then a sacred word can put you to sleep. The extreme of the sacred word, at first that wakes you up, that was the solution, now becomes the problem. Sometimes a person may go into therapy and really has done very well in a few months. 20 years later, they're still in therapy. And then perhaps that just became a habit and nothing is going on anymore. It's just redundant. That's the robot. The robot's redundant. Sometimes I'm asked about our Taekwondo practice. Oh wow, it looks kind of robotic. Well, that's like saying the sacred word over and over. You establish a foundation, which is very important in anything, and then from having that foundation, then you create something new. Example. You're born to be a great novelist, and you're 4 years old, and you somehow know you're to be a great novelist at 4 years old. But you kick and scream at learning your alphabets. And you don't want to write A every day at 10 in the morning in handwriting class. Little b, capital B, little c, capital C, over and over. Well, you need to learn to read and write as a foundation. It's repetitive. But then once you have that, once you've brought that skill into your being, then you create something. That's what insight is. Then you create something new out of it. So that's why martial art, it'll have a form, but there is lots of room to play outside of that form after you have foundations. The form brings you back to fundamentals. And so in my particular martial art, the movements are designed to be done quickly. Quick, quick, quick. The idea being that by doing the motions quick, 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 there is no time for you to think and become involved. And so hopefully it delivers that experience, that Zen moment, that no mind moment. That is what martial art is. And so that's why I practice martial art. But I have to remember why I'm doing it. Why you're doing something keeps you clear about the intention of what you're doing. That's important. Not knowing your intention or lying to yourself about the intention is also a form of sleep. You know, I'll give you an example. There are some people who go out and anywhere, they'll take a class. They will join a gym. They will go to an investment seminar. But really in the back of their mind, they're not there to take a class. They're there because they might meet someone. That's fine. But be clear on your intention. And when you're congruent with your intention, then your energy, your biological makeup can support your spirit, rather than having all of this idealism of who you are, what you want to be, all the while your feet are walking that way, rather than walking in that, same alignment. And that takes practice and takes great patience. That's what spiritual practice means, practice. You see those two words there, spiritual practice. I really have learned to love the metaphysical know-it-alls, because you tell them anything. Oh, I know that already, I should be teaching. Okay. Go and teach something then, right? But being able to say it and then trying to live it can be two different things. I try my best to, myself, to only speak about things of which I have some experience. And I think I'm pretty good at, if I'm teaching a class, saying, I have heard thus and so. I heard someone quote thus and so. I don't know, I haven't had that experience, or I haven't achieved that, right? What I do know for sure in this regard is that when you wake up in the morning and you're grateful, you wake up grateful. When you pause for a moment and breathe before you react, oh my God, you save yourself a lot of trouble. I know that from experience too. You save yourself a lot of trouble because then you're not approaching that problem alone. When I take a deep breath, I have this little meditative technique I have in the back of my head. I take a deep breath before starting something, talking to someone maybe. And that means to me, I'm breathing in the universe. I'm not just here by myself. I'm breathing in the universe. I'm bringing the whole presence of the universe here as much as possible, and as much as it can express through me. That's what that breath intent means. That's what I'm doing. And then I don't have to worry about it, because I know something else is in charge. Something much greater. Back to suffering. And I said to this friend, I think your problem is you haven't suffered enough, meaning you haven't moved through it. Or maybe it's such little things that your motivation to suffer is very low. You'll take a little incident and you will squeeze maximum amount of suffering out of it. That's a way perhaps of staying asleep, or a way of perpetuating some other habits that people can have. Sometimes people aren't worriers as much as they say they are. Instead, they're complainers, really. What a proficient complainer does in a circle is draw attention to themselves. And so if you can take a deep breath and see that, and you think, there's a difference between feedback and a complaint. Feedback is feedback. Complaint has no open door. There's no way to go beyond that complaint. There's no way to fix it. There's no possibility in that sense. And so the person may not really be complaining, but maybe using complaining as a device. Please pay attention to me. I'm over here. And that's okay. That's the highest level of creativity that they have. This is a good spiritual exercise. I had a very good friend who passed away in her 90s. And I remember whenever I was in town, I would take her to see a film. She liked to get out and see a film, and she was, of course, had complete mental engagement in her 90s. And one day we were at the theater and going to the popcorn stand, and the man there was obviously and extremely very rude. Wow. And I kind of got like a little bit not happy because I felt very protective of my friend here who is in her 90s. And then I watched something amazing. She got close to him and she said, here's a tip. And she gave him a $5 tip on a box of popcorn. And it totally changed him in that moment. And it changed the popcorn line. And then we stood back and we watched how he treated everybody else differently after that. Now that was a metaphor from the universe. My goodness, what little effort in a second did it take to change the popcorn line? That was amazing. So we have power. We have spiritual power. Maybe it's the only power we have. But too often, we don't wave our magic wand and use the power that's there. I watched her use her spiritual power to affect the space that she was in. And that's part of spiritual practice. So why don't people exercise their spiritual power? In the example of my good friend changing the energy in the popcorn line, it's very simple. Oh, I'm going to look foolish. Or I'm giving my power away by, not demanding to see the manager. This man is rude and you need to fire him. And it comes down to this. What we've learned in the mystery school is that spiritual growth only happens when you're vulnerable. Because that man could have said, what do you mean giving me $5? Take your $5 and go sit in your seat. He could have said that. And that's what we're afraid of. We're going to make the gesture and it's not going to work. We're going to make the gesture and we're going to look foolish, and we opened up and we're vulnerable. Yes. But then you apply the next practice. You take a deep breath. You know you did it for them as much as for you. You go sit down and you send him energy and love from a distance. It's the fear of vulnerability that keeps people from reaching out and practicing when there could be something so easy like that would change everything. So everyone in the world, most people you meet, ourselves, are asleep at some level. We have to do whatever we can to move ourselves, meditate ourselves, contemplate, to wake ourselves up, whatever your practice is. The root to that is not reading 100,000 books on the subject. Practice something. Practice something. And that's how you achieve wakefulness. Yeah, I think so.